Jasmine Carter woke before dawn, her heart humming with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. The first light of morning filtered through the pale curtains of her small bedroom, illuminating framed photographs of her family, her mother's proud smile at Jasmine's high school graduation, her younger brother's goofy grin as he tossed a baseball in their backyard. Each image reminded her of how far she had come. At just 18, she was on the brink of a new chapter, one that would take her beyond the familiar streets of Washington, D.C., into the inner workings of the Central Intelligence Agency. She, dressed carefully in a simple yet professional outfit, a crisp white blouse tucked into tailored navy slacks, her sensible black flats polished until they reflected the soft light of her desk lamp. Her curly hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail that bounced lightly as she moved. Jasmine paused to look at herself in the mirror, practicing a calm expression until she could believe her own reflection was the assured young woman she aspired to be. After all, today she would meet her CIA supervisor for the first time, and she wanted every detail to speak of competence and respect. In the kitchen, her mother had left a note beside a steaming mug of coffee and a plate of whole-grain toast, with honey. Jasmine smiled at the familiar domestic scene. Her mother's quiet support had been her anchor through every challenge. Though her family knew she would be working in what often felt like a world of secrets, they had cheered her on with unreserved faith. Her father's words from last night echoed in her mind. "You belong there just as much as anyone. Don't let doubt hold you back." Jasmine took a deep breath and tucked the note into her pocket, feeling a surge of determination. By 7 o'clock, she was on the road toward her temporary housing in Arlington, Virginia. The crisp spring air was clean and sharp, carrying the scent of blooming cherry blossoms that lined the sidewalks. She watched the trees arch gracefully over the street, their pink petals dancing in the breeze like confetti. For a moment, she felt as though she was in two worlds at once, the quiet beauty of early morning and the high-stakes environment she was about to enter. Her internship base was a modest apartment complex, just a few blocks from the CIA's headquarters. Today, though, she had errands to run before reporting for her first briefing. She needed supplies, a notebook with heavy pages, pens that wouldn't bleed, and perhaps a few healthy snacks to keep her energy levels steady during long meetings. Jasmine parked in front of a small convenience store with a blue awning that read "Quick Stop." She grabbed her tote bag and stepped inside. The store's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a cool glow on the rows of products. The air smelled of fresh coffee, salty chips, and the faint sweetness of candy bars. Jasmine walked down the aisles with purpose, scanning shelves stocked with everything from bottled water to energy bars to notepads. She selected a sturdy spiral notebook with a hard cover, plain black so it wouldn't draw attention, and a pack of fine point pens in various colors. She slipped a few protein bars and a bottle of sparkling water into her bag for later. As she approached the register, Jasmine paused to organize her purchases. She arranged the pens on top of the notebook, slid the water to one side, and tucked the snacks neatly in the corner. The cashier, a young man with a gentle smile, greeted her with a quick nod. "Morning," she said softly, her voice steady, despite her racing heart. "Morning," he replied, scanning her items. The total was less than $15. Jasmine reached into her bag for her wallet. That was when she first noticed the two uniformed police officers who had just entered the store. They didn't move with the casual ease of customers browsing for snacks. Instead, their eyes were focused on her. One stood by the entrance, hand resting on his duty belt, while the other paused in the middle aisle, as though waiting for her to finish her transaction. Jasmine felt a flicker of unease. She reminded herself that she had done nothing wrong. It was probably just coincidence that they were here at the same time. She offered a polite smile to the cashier and slid her credit card across the counter. But as the officer at the entrance began to stride toward her, the smile slipped from her face. The officer approached the register and cleared his throat softly, making the cashier look away. "Ma'am," he said, eyeing the items in her bag. "Is that everything you're purchasing?" Jasmine blinked in surprise. "Yes," she replied. "Is there a problem?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at his partner, who had now moved closer. "We received a report of a possible shoplifting incident. the officer said, as though reading from a script. Someone matching your description was seen leaving with merchandise without paying. Jasmine felt her pulse quicken. She took a breath, trying to remain calm. I just paid for these, she said softly, holding up her receipt. You can check with your dispatch if you like. The officer's expression didn't soften. Instead, he leaned forward, pointing at the notebook. That spiral notebook, was it paid for? Jasmine felt a flush of indignation. Yes, she said. I just paid for everything. Here's the receipt. She handed it to the cashier, who showed it to the officer. For a moment, the officer studied it, his brow furrowed. Then he looked back at Jasmine as though searching for another excuse. Your ID, please, he said curtly. Jasmine's heart sank for a second. It was rare to be asked for identification after paying for a few dollars worth of goods. But she knew her rights and gathered herself. She reached into her blouse pocket and pulled out her wallet. Among her driver's license and credit cards was something far more unusual. A laminated CIA identification badge, complete with her name, photograph, and security clearance level. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stand still. Jasmine held out the badge, her hand steady despite the disbelief swirling in her mind. The officer snatched it from her hand, his eyes widening as he recognized the agency's seal. He blinked as though waking from a dream, and then glanced at his partner, who had drawn nearer. Neither officer spoke for a long moment. Jasmine watched them, her pulse still racing but her own expression composed. She didn't know whether to feel vindicated or humiliated. The cashier and other customers had fallen silent, their attention fixed on the unfolding drama. Jasmine realized how powerful bias could be, that even a CIA badge, theoretically the highest proof of authority, had not prevented her from being suspected simply because of her age, gender, and the color of her skin. At last, the officer cleared his throat and handed the badge back. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said, his tone awkward. His partner avoided Jasmine's gaze. There must have been a mix-up. Jasmine offered a tight nod. She didn't trust her voice yet, so she simply retrieved her items and stepped away from the counter. She tapped her card to pay for the transaction one more time, unwilling to give them the satisfaction of seeing her anger. The cashier rang up the final total again, eyes sympathetic. Clutching her bag, Jasmine strode out of the store into the warm spring air. The cherry blossoms overhead looked as cheerful as ever, but to Jasmine they seemed to mock the moment's unfairness. She paused on the sidewalk, took a deep breath, and let it out slowly. She was grateful that no further harm had come of the encounter, but she knew the story was far from over. In her mind, she replayed every second, noting the weight of the officer's stares, the way they had dismissed her before seeing her credentials. As she walked back toward her apartment, Jasmine's thoughts turned ahead to the briefing awaiting her. She could almost envision the rows of colleagues gathered around the conference table, the low hum of conversation punctuated by the click of laptop keys. She wondered how she would share what had just happened, whether her new team would understand, whether they would recognize the deeper lesson at play, that even within the most secretive and sophisticated agencies, bias could quietly persist. By the time she reached her building, the sun was fully risen, bathing everything in a golden glow. Jasmine paused at the entrance, placed her hand on the door handle, and straightened her shoulders. She was ready to face the next challenge. Whatever lay ahead, she would meet it with the same calm determination that had carried her through this morning's trial. After all, her journey was just beginning, and she intended to shape it on her own terms. Jasmine paused at the register, her fingers brushing lightly against the smooth cover of her black spiral notebook. The cashier rang up her items with practiced ease, scanning each pen, each snack, each bottle of water. Jasmine kept her expression calm, as though she were simply a young woman running a morning errand. Outside, a soft breeze stirred the petals of the blooming cherry trees. Inside, the bright fluorescent lights hummed, and the hum of everyday life felt comforting. Until it didn't. The moment the bell above the door chimed, Jasmine sensed a shift in the air. 2 police officers stepped into the store, and the familiar buzz of small talk and soft footsteps seemed to fade into silence around her. They wore dark uniforms and carried themselves with a quiet authority that made Jasmine's heart flutter in her chest. For a brief instant, she felt proud, until she realized they weren't here to chat. One officer moved with deliberate steps toward the counter, his gaze fixed on Jasmine. He didn't glance at the other customers browsing shelves or the cashier sorting receipts. His eyes remained locked on her. Jasmine swallowed, reminding herself that she had done nothing wrong. She had paid for every item in her hand and held the receipt to prove it. Still, the officer's posture spoke of suspicion. His partner lingered near the store entrance, watching Jasmine's every move as though waiting for her to make a mistake. "Excuse me?" the first officer said, his voice low but carrying clearly across the store. The cashier looked up, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Other customers paused, their conversations halting mid-sentence. Jasmine felt the weight of dozens of silent gazes upon her. She forced herself to remain steady, to meet the officer's scrutiny with calm assurance. "Ma'am, are you carrying any unpaid merchandise?" Jasmine's chest tightened, but she kept her voice gentle. "I just paid for these," she said, lifting her receipt and letting the paper flutter between her fingers. "I bought everything. Myself." She nodded to the items neatly arranged on the counter. "You can see the total here." The officer didn't reach for her receipt. Instead, he glanced at the notebook in her bag and then back at her. "That spiral notebook, did you pay for it?" The question felt unnecessary, almost theatrical. Jasmine nodded again. "Yes, sir. I paid for the notebook and the pens and the snacks." Her tone remained polite, though inside she felt a surge of irritation. She had come here to pick up supplies and maybe grab a quick breakfast bar, not to be the center of an impromptu interrogation. "Show me your ID." The words landed heavily in her ears. "Pause," he'd said. "Show me your ID." Jasmine's breath caught. She reached for her wallet, though she knew that handing over any form of identification would feel like acquiescing to an accusation. The cashier stepped back slightly, his eyes darting between Jasmine and the officers. Other customers shuffled, in their aisles glancing over the top of cereal boxes or pretending to read magazine covers. Jasmine pulled her driver's license from her wallet and offered it. The officer took it, peering at the small photograph as though expecting it to transform into someone else entirely. Then he handed it back without a word. Jasmine felt herself start to tremble, so she wrapped her fingers around her tote bag, strapped to anchor herself. The other officer stepped forward then, his expression unreadable. He glanced at the receipt lying on the counter and then at Jasmine's bag. "Are those pens yours?" he asked, tapping the counter lightly. Jasmine took a steadying breath. "Yes," she said. "Everything here is mine. I paid for it less than 2 minutes ago." She indicated the store clock with a tilt of her head. "If you check the security tape, you'll see me at the register just now." Silence stretched across the store like a too-tight rope. The cashier watched, uncertain whether to intervene. A man in the snack aisle let a bag of chips slip from his grasp in surprise. He hastily picked it up and stuffed it into his cart, trying to pretend nothing had happened. Jasmine imagined she could hear her own heartbeat thumping in her ears, like a drum. She wanted to say more, to argue that this was a misunderstanding, but she knew that any words she offered might be twisted or dismissed. At last, the officer spoke again, his tone colder now. "We got a call about a robbery. Someone said a girl matching your description left this area with unpaid items." He paused as if expecting her to reply with shame or admission. Instead, Jasmine met his gaze directly, her brown eyes clear and unflinching. "My description doesn't change the facts," she said quietly. "I'm not a shoplifter. I'm an intern with the CIA, actually. I'm starting my first briefing today." She paused, giving him space to react. The words hung in the air, heavy with their unexpected weight. The officer frowned, his lips pressed into a thin line. Jasmine felt her pulse quicken, uncertainty flickering in her stomach. Had she just made things worse? Rather than responding to her statement, the officer reached for his radio. Jasmine watched him click a button and speak into the microphone. She couldn't hear what he said, but she saw his shoulders stiffen, his posture tightening. His partner stepped closer, peering curiously at Jasmine's tote bag. Jasmine's throat felt dry. She forced herself to swallow. Then the first officer turned back to her and said, "Let's see that badge." His voice, while not unkind, carried an edge of doubt. Jasmine opened her blouse pocket and drew out the thin, laminated card she carried for moments just like this. Not that she had expected to ever need it during a grocery run. She held it out carefully, the CIA seal gleaming under the harsh store lights. The badge bore her photograph, her name, and her clearance level. It was the clearest proof she could present. The moment he took the badge into his hand, the officer's expression flickered. He raised one eyebrow, examined the badge as though it might be forged. His partner leaned in, eyes widening at the emblem of the Central Intelligence Agency. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The stunned silence grew so palpable that Jasmine could almost feel it pressing against her skin. Around them, the store held its collective breath. The cashier stopped scanning items frozen between customer and register. The snack aisle gentleman halted his distracted rearrangement of chips. A young woman at the back of the store leaned against the wall, phone in hand, as though unsure whether to call someone. Even the humming fluorescent lights seemed to dim, as if uncertain how to illuminate this unexpected reveal. At last, the officer's face shifted into something resembling embarrassment. He handed back the badge with a small, awkward gesture. "I apologize, Miss Carter," he said, his voice low. He avoided her gaze. "There was a report, and we had to check." His words hung between them, an apology tainted by hesitation. Jasmine took the badge, tucking it carefully back into her pocket. She steadied herself before replying. "I understand," she said quietly, "but please know that assumptions can create real harm." She met the officer's eyes, but he looked away, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I hope it won't happen again." He mumbled something, half apology, half notice. Then both officers turned and walked toward the door without another word. As they passed, the older officer paused and gave a curt nod. Jasmine nodded back, though she wasn't sure it registered as respect. The store bell tinkled as they left, and the soft murmur of customers returned like a tide shifting back in. The cashier cleared his throat and offered Jasmine a small, sympathetic smile. "Sorry about that," he said quietly. He scanned her items once more, ringing them up. "On the house," he added, pushing the total down to 0. Jasmine blinked at him, taken aback by his kindness. She shook her head. "No, I'll pay," she said firmly. "Thank you, though." She handed him her card again and completed the purchase. Bag in hand, Jasmine stepped outside into the spring sunshine. The cherry trees waved overhead, their petals drifting lazily across the sidewalk. She paused and inhaled deeply, letting the fresh air wash over her. Despite the officer's departure, she felt a flush of anger rising in her cheeks. Anger at their assumptions, at the ease with which they had accused her, at the way they had dismissed her before seeing her credentials. At the same time, she felt a steely resolve settle in her chest. This incident, she realized, was far from a private moment. It would shape the way she approached her internship, the conversations she would have with colleagues, the policies she might one day influence. The world she was entering was full of secrets, and yet here was a secret of its own, the deep roots of bias that could unsettle even the most credentialed among them. Jasmine straightened her shoulders and adjusted the straps of her tote bag. She felt the familiar weight of her notebook inside, a symbol of her commitment to observation and careful record-keeping. As she walked back toward her apartment, she resolved to document every detail of this encounter. She would speak of it, in her first briefing, not out of anger, but to illuminate how perceptions could warp reality. She would listen, learn, and use this moment to build bridges between unlikely halves of her identity. A young black woman and a fledgling intelligence officer. By the time she reached her front door, Sunlight had warmed the pavement and life. Outside had resumed its usual rhythm. Birds sang in the trees, and somewhere nearby a deli owner swept his stoop. Jasmine paused, hand on the doorknob, and closed her eyes. She let the sounds of the neighborhood seep into her senses, the distant hum of traffic, a child's laughter from a playground. Jasmine arrived at the CIA's training facility, just as the sun climbed higher in the sky, turning the glass facade of the building into a mirror that reflected the city beyond. She took a moment to steel herself before stepping inside. The lobby was spacious and sleek, all clean lines and polished surfaces. A security guard gave her a courteous nod as she passed through the metal detector, and she returned the gesture with calm confidence. Inside, the air was cool, tinged with the faint scent of coffee and ozone from the air conditioning. Jasmine followed the signs to Conference Room B, where her first official briefing would take place. Her heart fluttered with a mix of excitement and a lingering unease from the morning's encounter. She steadied herself by recalling her family's support, feeling the warmth of her mother's faith and her father's encouragement guiding her steps. When she entered the room, she found a dozen people already seated around a long table, their expressions focused and curious. They represented a diverse assembly of analysts, officers, and fellow interns, some older, some with accents hinting at far-off postings. Jasmine scanned the nameplates: Mr. Hernandez, Ms. Liu, Mr. Patel, and more. At the head of the table stood her supervisor, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun and sharp gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Good morning," her supervisor said, her voice calm but carrying easily across the room. "I'm Maureen Beckett, and I'll be guiding you through your rotation this summer." She paused to let the words sink in. "Welcome to the Analysis Division." Jasmine felt a ripple of pride as Ms. Beckett scanned the room, making brief eye contact with each person. When her gaze met Jasmine's, she gave a small, welcoming nod. After brief introductions, Maureen launched into an overview of the division's work, gathering intelligence reports from around the globe, analyzing them for patterns, and advising policymakers. Jasmine listened intently, jotting notes in her notebook, every word feeling significant. She was eager to absorb all she could, to prove herself not just by her badge, but by her sharp observations and careful insights. Halfway through the overview, Maureen paused. "Before we dive into specific assignments," she said, "I want to acknowledge that stationed here are individuals from many backgrounds. We all bring unique perspectives. Over the years, we've learned that diversity isn't just a buzzword. It's vital to understanding complex global issues." Jasmine felt a surge of respect for her supervisor's candor. It was rare to hear such openness so early in a briefing. As the session continued, Jasmine took note of key projects, tracking cyber threats, monitoring political developments in volatile regions, and liaising with overseas stations. At one point, Maureen described a recent exercise in which trainees had to piece together fragmented reports to predict a possible security breach. Jasmine's mind raced with possibilities, imagining herself poring over encrypted messages, maps, and satellite imagery to uncover hidden threats. Near the end of the briefing, Maureen asked for volunteers to share why they had chosen this path. Hands shot up around the table. An analyst from Chicago spoke of a passion for history and patterns. A former linguist explained how language skills could reveal intentions. Jasmine held her breath as several people volunteered in turn. When there were no more hands raised, she realized she would need to speak if she wanted her motivation to be known. Maureen's gaze settled on Jasmine. "Yes," she said, nodding toward her. "Would you like to tell us what brought you here?" Jasmine took a steadying breath. She remembered the morning's events, the convenience store, the officers, the way her credentials had nearly been overshadowed by assumptions. She chose her words carefully, meeting the room's watchful eyes. "I've always believed in dedicated service," she began, her voice firm. "I want to contribute by gathering facts, analyzing data, and helping leaders make informed decisions. But I also carry a personal lesson, that sometimes, even the best prepared among us can be underestimated. I want to use my experiences to Ensure we consider all perspectives no matter how unexpected. A thoughtful silence followed. Jasmine could feel the weight of her own words settling in the room. Then slowly, Maureen smiled, a small, approving curve of her lips. "Thank you, Jasmine," she said. "That's exactly the kind of insight we need. Remember, intelligence isn't just about what you know, it's about recognizing what you don't yet see." After the briefing, the interns were escorted to their workstations. Cubicles partitioned by low panels, each equipped with a computer, a phone, and a small shelf for personal items. Jasmine's desk was near a window overlooking a courtyard, where more cherry trees bloomed in vivid pink. She arranged her notebook, laptop, and pens with care, creating a space that felt orderly and ready for action. Moments later, a colleague named Avery leaned over the panel. Avery was an intern as well, tall, with curly hair and a friendly grin. "Hey, Jasmine, right?" Avery asked. "I'm Avery. Welcome aboard." They shook hands in the modern way, fist bumping lightly. Avery glanced toward Jasmine's badge clipped to her lanyard. "CIA internship, that's serious business." Avery's tone was half joking, but there was genuine admiration in their eyes. Jasmine smiled. "I know, it feels surreal." She paused, wondering whether to share what had happened earlier. "I had an interesting morning," she said. "Let's just say I learned that sometimes credentials aren't enough until someone's willing to look." Avery frowned in empathy. "I hate that," Avery said, "but it shows you've got both the credentials and the character." Their smile was warm. "If you need anything, tips for navigating this place, a friendly partner for coffee runs, let me know." Jasmine felt a rush of relief. Within minutes, she had a potential ally in this huge, complex environment. "I appreciate that," she said sincerely. "Thank you." The rest of the morning passed in a swirl of orientation tasks: setting up, secure communications, learning to navigate the internal database, and reviewing basic protocols for handling sensitive information. Jasmine absorbed each instruction, her mind buzzing with new acronyms and procedures. She was careful to jot down everything in her notebook, knowing how easily details could blur when anxiety set in. At lunchtime, a small group of interns gathered in a break room with a kitchenette. The walls were decorated with abstract art, colorful swirls that seemed to represent the global turbulence the CIA studied. Jasmine found a spot at the table alongside Avery and two other interns. One was a quiet young man with a serious expression, named Carlos. The other was a woman named May, whose calm demeanor and soft-spoken manner belied a sharp intellect. They exchanged small talk about their backgrounds and how they ended up here. Jasmine shared a brief summary of her studies, political science and computer science at university. Carlos spoke of his interest in satellite analysis, and May described her language skills in Mandarin and Arabic. Avery added that they had a knack for cyber forensics. Despite the brevity of their introductions, Jasmine sensed a budding camaraderie, a mutual respect born of shared purpose. As they ate, Jasmine's thoughts drifted back to the convenience store. She realized that stories like hers often went untold in professional settings, hidden under layers of decorum and protocol. But here, in this room buzzing with intelligence professionals in training, she felt that honesty could be a powerful asset. She decided that once she had settled in more, she would propose a workshop or discussion group about unconscious bias and its impact on high-stakes work. She wasn't yet sure how to pitch it, but the idea filled her with energy. After lunch, Jasmine returned to her desk for her first real assignment, a simple task, at least on the surface. She was to compile a report on recent regional developments in West Africa, focusing on political stability indicators. She opened her laptop, logins humming through secure channels. The screen displayed multiple tabs: news feeds, data logs, satellite imagery, and previous internal reports. Jasmine organized her approach. First, she would scan open-source news articles to identify key events. Then she would cross-reference those events with socioeconomic data sets to assess trends. Finally, she would draft a concise summary, complete with charts and bullet points for her supervisor's review. It was the kind of structured work she had dreamed of, analyzing real-world information and turning it into actionable intelligence. She began by opening a browser window and navigating to the internal news portal. Headlines scrolled past: a ceasefire in one region, protests in another. Jasmine clicked on an article about recent elections, reading carefully and taking notes on voter turnout statistics. She flagged sections for deeper analysis, remarks from local leaders, comments from international observers, and reports of minor skirmishes. An hour passed in what felt like minutes. Jasmine's notebook quickly filled with bullet points, observations, and questions. She sipped her water and munched on a protein bar, mindful of staying focused. As she worked, she realized how rewarding it felt to channel her morning's determination into this assignment. Her earlier frustration now fueled her precision. Just as she was drafting her summary, her supervisor's voice came through her computer speakers. "Jasmine, do you have a moment?" It was polite but carried authority. Jasmine minimized her windows and answered. Maureen's face appeared on the screen, framed by shelves of neatly arranged books and binders. ChatGPT said. Jasmine stepped from the cool brightness of the convenience store into the gentle warmth of the spring afternoon. The door's bell tinkled a soft farewell behind her, but the sound felt hollow, as though it marked the end of one world and the uneasy beginning of another. She paused on the sidewalk, adjusting the strap of her tote bag that carried her notebook, pens, and the few snacks she had purchased. Around her, the cherry trees arched gracefully, their pale pink petals drifting in lazy spirals down to the pavement. Every drifting blossom reminded her of how easily people could be swept away by assumptions, until the ground caught them again. Her heart still pounded from the confrontation. She replayed the officer's words in her mind, the clipped demand to see her ID, the tense silence when she produced her CIA badge, the mumbled apology that felt more rote than sincere. Jasmine had felt a knot of indignation tighten her chest when the first officer refused to believe her credentials. Yet, as he returned her badge and bowed his head, she recognized the relief in his posture, as if he too had been shaken by the unexpected turn of events. Across the street, a delivery truck lumbered past, its motor humming. Jasmine tucked her badge safely away in an inner pocket, next to her driver's license, and took a deep breath. She surveyed the storefronts: a flower shop, bright with daisies and roses, a small deli pumping the scent of freshly baked bread into the air, a barber's shop with its striped pole rotating idly. Everything looked normal, unchanged by the morning's drama. Yet Jasmine felt a subtle shift within herself, a mixture of gratitude, sadness, and resolve that fluttered beneath her ribs. She began walking back toward her apartment, her steps deliberate and measured. With each stride, she reviewed the incident, noting tiny details she might include in her journal later. The way the fluorescent lights in the store had flickered above the officers' heads as though uncertain whether to keep shining. The cashier's hesitant glance when the officers first accused her. The man in the snack aisle who dropped his chips in surprise. Even the jingling of coins as the cashier rang up her items again, on the house, only to have Jasmine insist on paying. That gesture from the cashier, a simple offer to forgive her payment, stung with both kindness and irony. She saw in his eyes a quiet apology, not just for his own discomfort but for the bluntness of authority that can strike without care. Jasmine felt grateful for his empathy, but also proud that she had insisted on paying. Accepting charity, in that moment, would have felt like surrendering her dignity a second time. Halfway home, she paused on a bench beneath one of the cherry trees. A gentle breeze stirred the petals overhead, and she watched them dance down like soft pink snowflakes. Jasmine reached into her bag and retrieved her spiral notebook. A plain black cover, unassuming, yet it contained the record of every thought she meant to keep safe. She opened to a fresh page and began to write. Today I was accused of shoplifting. I flashed my badge. They apologized. She paused, tapping her pen against the page. Those two sentences felt too stark, too lacking in the undercurrent of emotion she carried. She flipped to a margin and added, even a CIA badge can't override bias. Jasmine sat for a few moments longer, letting the quiet of the afternoon envelop her. She thought of her family. Her mother, who would fret if she heard of this incident. Her father, who would want to dissect every detail to find lessons. Her younger brother, who might be inspired by her composure but also confused that such a thing could happen at all. She pictured herself explaining the incident to them, and she realized she needed to prepare for their concern. Standing up, Jasmine closed her notebook and slid it back into her tote. She resumed walking, focusing on the rhythm of her steps. Near her building, she passed a group of teenagers shooting hoops on a makeshift court. Their laughter and shouts brought a smile to her face, reminders that life for many still moved on with ease. Yet Jasmine knew that moments like hers could linger in the mind, haunting or teaching depending on how one let them. Arriving at the lobby, she tapped her keycard to unlock the door. The familiar smell of hallway carpet and recycled air greeted her. She climbed the short flight of stairs to her apartment, the weight of her tote bag pressing into her shoulder like a physical reminder of her morning burden. Inside, the apartment was quiet, bathed in golden light. She set her bag on the small kitchen table and poured herself a glass of water, then sank onto the couch, resting her elbows on her knees. Jasmine exhaled slowly. She needed to process what had happened, to turn anger into strategy, humiliation into understanding. After a moment, she pulled her phone from her pocket and tapped her mother's name. When her mother answered, Jasmine heard the comforting lilt of her voice, full of warmth and curiosity. "Hey, Mom," she said softly. "Jasmine, how are you?" Her mother replied. There was a note of concern in her tone. "Everything okay?" "Today?" Jasmine paused. She thought of the officers, the badge, the flicker of doubt in their eyes. "I'm okay," she said finally. "I did have a strange incident this morning at the store, though. I'll tell you about it when I see you next." Her mother coaxed details out of her gently. The accusation, the badge, the apology, the cashier's kindness. Jasmine spoke clearly, skipping no detail, letting her mother react with disbelief and empathy. When she finished, there was a long silence on the line. "Oh, honey," her mother said, her voice thick. "I'm so sorry. You did nothing wrong." Jasmine closed her eyes, picturing her mother's worried expression. "I know," she said, "but I'm okay. I want to use this." Her voice caught. "I want it to mean something more than embarrassment." Her mother paused again, then said, "I think that's brave of you. You'll find a way to make it count." Jasmine felt a swell of gratitude, and she nodded against the phone, even though her mother couldn't see her. "Thanks, Mom," she whispered. "I'll be fine." After ending the call, Jasmine sat for a while longer, letting her thoughts coalesce. She returned to her notebook and flipped past her earlier notes. On a fresh page, she wrote a new heading in tidy letters: Lessons Learned. Under it, she listed, "Bias can overshadow credentials. Kindness can come from unexpected places. Use every encounter as insight." She stared at the page, then added in a new bullet, "Propose Bias Awareness Workshop." Jasmine knew that she wanted to share this experience, not with anger or blame, but as a teaching moment. Within her internship program, she imagined a small session where interns and analysts could discuss unconscious bias and how it can affect investigations. She believed that empathy and open conversation could sharpen the agency's judgment and foster better teamwork. Feeling energized by this idea, she packed up her notebook and checked her watch. It was late afternoon, and she still had time before her evening debrief with a mentor in the program. Jasmine brewed a cup of green tea and settled at her makeshift desk, opening her laptop. She drafted an email to her mentor, describing the morning's experience, her reflections, and her proposal for a short workshop during the next intern seminar. She wrote clearly, framing the workshop as a way to heighten awareness of subtle biases that could impact high-stakes work. When she was satisfied, she clicked send. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Jasmine moved to her window and watched the city lights begin to flicker on. Street lamps glowing softly, windows lighting up in apartments across the way. She thought about the journey ahead, a summer of briefings, reports, and perhaps moments she couldn't yet imagine. She felt a firm resolve settle within her. The incident at the store had unsettled her, but it had also given her a clearer sense of purpose. She was here not only to gather intelligence about the world, but to bring her unique perspective to bear on the agency itself. That evening, she packed her bag for the next day, placing her notebook, pens, and badge in their familiar spots. She smiled at the neat stack. Each item reminded her that she belonged here, that she had earned her place, and that she would not let bias diminish her contributions. With a final glance at her apartment's modest but comforting interior, she turned out the light. The next morning, Jasmine would walk the halls of the CIA with confidence rooted not only in her credentials, but in the lessons she had drawn from a single, unexpected confrontation. She would carry with her the knowledge that true strength lay in the willingness to learn from every moment, to transform discomfort into dialogue, and to meet bias with both grace and resolve. In that way, the cherry blossoms that fell around her would become symbols not of fragility, but of renewal. Petals that drifted, settled, and took root in fertile ground. Jasmine awoke to the soft glow of morning light filtering through her curtains. Today was different. Her proposal for the bias awareness workshop had been approved for the next intern seminar, and she felt a quiet thrill at the chance to turn her own experience into something that could help others. She dressed carefully, choosing the same crisp white blouse and navy slacks she had worn on her first day. The outfit felt like armor and reminder. She belonged here, even if some people might not have believed it at first glance. On her walk to the office, the city hummed with energy. Street vendors arranged colorful fruits at their stands, and cyclists wove through traffic with practiced ease. Jasmine paused beneath a cherry tree in full bloom, letting the petals swirl around her. She remembered the first time she saw these trees that morning, how their beauty had contrasted with the tension in the convenience store. Now they felt like a promise of renewal, evidence that beauty and misunderstanding could coexist and give birth to growth. Inside the lobby of the CIA building, she exchanged greetings with the security guard, who offered her a polite nod. She made her way to Conference Room D, where the intern seminar would take place. The room already held a small cluster of chairs and a long table set with notepads, pens, and a simple projector. A handful of interns and a few analysts milled about, chatting quietly. When Jasmine entered, several people turned to her, curiosity in their eyes. She smiled and shook hands with colleagues, Avery, May, Carlos, all ready to hear what she had to say. As the room settled, Jasmine stepped to the front, her notebook in hand. She paused to look at her audience, feeling both the weight and the excitement of the moment. Then she began. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice calm and clear. "I want to talk about something that happened to me recently. A moment that reminded me how bias can shape our judgments even in places where we least expect it." She briefly recounted the encounter in the convenience store, the officer's suspicion, and the moment she produced her CIA badge. She described the relief she saw on their faces and the deeper discomfort she felt afterward. She watched her colleagues' expressions shift from curiosity to concern to thoughtful recognition. Jasmine continued, "This incident could have been a private annoyance, but I believe it holds lessons for all of us. Our work depends on accurate observation and fair judgment. If we let unconscious bias cloud our decisions, we risk missing key details or misreading vital information." She clicked a button on her laptop, and the projector displayed 3 simple bullet points. Recognize assumptions before they guide. Actions. Seek diverse perspectives to challenge your own. Create space for honest conversation. She spoke to each point in turn, weaving in small examples from her internship so far. A moment when she and Avery debated different ways to interpret a diplomatic communique, a discussion she had with May about cultural context and language analysis, and her own surprise at how quickly she herself had judged the officers before they saw her badge. As she spoke, Jasmine noticed heads nodding, pens moving across notepads, and faces reflecting genuine engagement. She invited questions at the end and hands went up. An analyst asked how to bring up bias in conversations without making people defensive. Jasmine suggested starting with personal stories, like she had, and framing the discussion as a shared, learning opportunity rather than an accusation. Another intern asked for tips on recognizing their own blind spots. Jasmine recommended simple daily practices, pausing before reacting, asking why when assumptions arise, and seeking feedback from others. When the session ended, people lingered to thank her. A senior analyst she respected approached and said, "That was brave and insightful. I think we'll see real benefit from this." Jasmine felt warmth in her chest. She realized this was more than a one-time talk. It was the beginning of a culture shift. Later that afternoon, Jasmine received an unexpected email. The Internal Affairs Division had concluded its review of the store incident. Their findings acknowledged that the officers had acted on an unverified tip and apologized formally for any distress caused. The email also praised Jasmine's professionalism and composure. Jasmine read the words twice, feeling a mix of relief and vindication. She forwarded the email to her mentor, adding a note, "I'm glad they took it seriously. Even when bias is unconscious, we can still hold people accountable." As the summer progressed, Jasmine balanced her analytical assignments, reports on East Asian trade patterns, briefings on cybersecurity threats, reviews of diplomatic cables, with ongoing conversations about bias. She and Avery co-led a small working group that met weekly over coffee breaks, discussing articles on unconscious bias and sharing personal stories. The group's popularity grew, drawing participants from different divisions. In informal gatherings, Jasmine saw how openness could build trust and enrich analysis. Outside the agency, news of her workshop spread quietly through internal newsletters. One day, Jasmine was surprised to receive an invitation to speak at a public law enforcement conference on community engagement. The organizers wanted to hear how intelligence practices could inform fair policing. Jasmine hesitated. Speaking in public, especially so soon, felt daunting, but she accepted, recognizing another chance to bridge worlds. In the weeks that followed, she prepared her talk with care, drawing on her own experience and the lessons she had learned. On the day of the conference, she stood before an audience of police officers, community leaders, and fellow analysts. She spoke candidly about her encounter in the store, framing it as a learning moment rather than a grievance. She emphasized the power of empathy, communication, and structured self-reflection. She shared simple tools, like the pause and ask method, to help officers recognize when assumptions crept into their work. Afterward, a police chief approached her, shaking her hand. "I needed to hear that," he said. "Too often we ignore our own biases. I'm going to take these ideas back to my precinct." Jasmine smiled, realizing that her story had traveled farther than she had imagined. Back in her office, Jasmine reflected on the journey she had taken, from that unnerving moment at the cash register to influencing conversations at the highest levels of law enforcement. She thought of her family, who had worried and supported her, and of her colleagues who had embraced her ideas. She felt gratitude for every step, even the painful ones, because they had shaped her path. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of gold and purple, Jasmine walked through the courtyard where the cherry trees still bloomed, though their petals were fading. She picked up a single fallen blossom and held it in her palm. The flower was delicate but carried the memory of its full bloom. Jasmine placed it gently on a nearby bench, a small offering to the cycle of renewal it symbolized. She knew her internship would end soon, but she felt certain that her work and her voice would continue to matter. She had learned that influence often began with a single moment of courage, that real change came when people listened and reflected. And she understood that bias, like the cherry blossom's petals, could drift into view unexpectedly. But unlike those petals, bias could be guided, understood, and transformed. As Jasmine walked back to her apartment, she thought of the summer ahead. There would be new briefings, more reports, perhaps fresh challenges she could not yet foresee. But she carried with her a deeper confidence, rooted not only in her training or her badge, but in her commitment to fair-mindedness and her belief in the power of conversation. That night, she opened her notebook to her lessons learned page. The words she had written there long ago now felt like a starting point, not an end. Recognize assumptions before they guide actions. Seek diverse perspectives to challenge your own. Create space for honest conversation. She added one final line: use every voice, no matter how small, to shape a fairer world. Jasmine closed the notebook, satisfied. Tomorrow, she would continue her work, ready to apply every lesson she had gained and every insight she had gathered. Her journey had begun with a misunderstanding, but it led her to a clearer vision. One where empathy, integrity, and courage came together to guide each decision, one petal at a time.